Hello, everyone. This is Carl Elefante speaking. I'm going to serve as the moderator for the next three panels this afternoon. And we're going to start with recess, practice, and policy of professional organizations making big moves. When I first moved to Washington many years ago to start architecture school, I went to work with Perkins and Will, and I happened to be there when Larry Perkins and Phil Will were retiring. And I had this opportunity to talk to these two icons. And I asked them, what makes great architecture? And I'll always remember Larry Perkins' answer to me, it's all about people. As a 20-something, I was expecting a very different answer, but it took me a while before I finally caught up with him and realized just how important it really is to engage people in the profession. The organizations that we're going to hear from today are devoted to really connecting with and mobilizing and empowering professionals through their associations into climate action. And really addressing these two theaters of activity, practice and policy, the places that we really can make a difference in climate action. So we have with us today Jane Frederick, who is a fellow of the American Institute of Architects and the 2020 president of AIA. Jane is also a co-founder with her husband of Frederick and Frederick Architects in Beaufort, South Carolina, by the way, an AIA 2030 commitment signatory firm. Also with us is Andrew Waugh from the steering group of Architects Declare in the United Kingdom. He is principal and founder of Waugh Thistleton Architects in Shoreditch, UK. And you may know him from their work on the Murray Grove building that really was a project that spearheaded timber typology in tall buildings. We're going to start with two brief presentations by Jane and by Andrew, and then we'll follow that up with Q&A. So with that, I'd like to invite Jane to take over and share her screen and make her presentation. Jane?
Thank you, Carl. And thanks to all of you across the nation and around the world for joining us in this vital discussion. You know, if you had told me this time last year that most of the events I'd attend in 2020 would be virtual, I would have been impressed. Impressed that we could transition so quickly and effectively to making conferences so much greener. Of course, we never would have chosen these circumstances to prompt change. But in the midst of so much hardship, finding silver linings is important. And it's encouraging to know that large-scale change is possible. Large-scale, transformative change is exactly what's needed to address the climate crisis. And large-scale, comprehensive transformation is the purpose of the AIA's program I'd like to talk about today, the 2030 Commitment. As many of you know, the 2030 Commitment is a platform for architects, engineers, and owners to work together toward the architecture and design community's goal of achieving a carbon neutral built environment by the year 2030. The 2030 Commitment aims to transform the practice of architecture to respond to the climate crisis in a way that is holistic, firm-wide, project-based, and data-driven. To date, 829 companies have joined the program. This month, we'll release the latest numbers from 2019, and I'm happy to tell you it was our best year yet. Reporting firms recorded 3.3 billion gross square feet across more than 100 countries. That's nearly the size of New Mexico. And they achieved a 49% reduction in predicted energy use intensity, the greatest reduction in the program's history. Even small firms can make a big difference. I can confirm that firsthand. Our small residential firm reported a 75.6% reduction last year. And what's significant is most of our clients do not ask for their buildings to be sustainable or to reduce the carbon. So to reach the 2030 commitment goals, we have a dual approach. First, as the architect, you can include many of the design strategies without overly involving the client. For example, most passive strategies such as building orientation, fenestration, and roof overhangs are part of our design. Then with the detailing such as drainage planes, air sealing, and the HVAC design, our clients trust us to do the right thing. The second approach is the hard part, because in my hot, humid climate, we cannot begin to reach the 2030 commitment goals without on-site power generation. Many of our clients are not initially thinking about solar, but they want a generator because of hurricanes in the area. But once we present to them the options of solar, they usually go with solar with a power wall of Tesla or SunVault batteries. Then they can generate their own power without a generator. With the federal and state tax credits and net metering, the payback is usually 7 to 9 years. And that does not include the savings from not purchasing a nasty, loud generator. One building, one project at a time really can make a difference. According to the Architecture 2030, as much as 50% of a city's greenhouse gas emissions can be produced by fewer than 5% of that city's buildings. Our data confirms that energy modeling is pivotal. In 2019 alone, projects that used energy modeling were 29% more energy efficient than non-modeled projects. With an energy efficiency increase of 29%, a medium-sized office building could save 133,400 kilowatt hours of electricity and nearly $14,000 each year. So if you're not modeling, you're leaving real energy and cost savings for your clients on the table. The 2030 commitment also recognizes that operational carbon is just one piece of the climate action puzzle. To meet international targets, it's critical to consider embodied carbon, meaning all the carbon emitted during the manufacture and transport of materials and during building construction. That's why we're revamping the design data exchange to enable firms to track whole building embodied carbon, and that will begin next month. When we launched the 2030 commitment 10 years ago, signatories used an elaborate spreadsheet to calculate and report their performance. Now, through the Design Data Exchange, known as DDX, tracking is much easier. Firms can quickly visualize their portfolio projects and compare their projects to others around the world. Architects know we can't achieve progress alone. That's why it's so encouraging that engineering companies are joining the 2030 commitment. Participation increased 22% last year, and we welcomed the program's first building owner, a nonprofit affordable housing developer. As daunting as the challenge may seem, progress is happening. According to an Architecture 2030 analysis, building sector carbon dioxide emissions are down 21% since 2005, even though the United States added more than 47 billion square feet of built space over the same period. But that's just a start. Working together, we can and must do more. If 2020 has taught us anything, it's that we're all in this together. The pandemic has also underlined the connection between climate and health, and how crises in both realms hit our most vulnerable communities the hardest. Communities of color are already disproportionately burdened by poor environmental quality and related health impacts. That same unacceptable pattern is evident in the COVID crisis, with African American, Latino, and Native American communities suffering harm from the virus at a higher rate. Scientists say that failure to address climate change could make future pandemics more frequent and more severe. One more reason action is urgent. Overcoming crisis on this scale, whether it's climate change, the coronavirus, or racial injustice, requires each of us to join together and contribute our individual capabilities for those of us. Here today, that means adapting the built environment. All communities need and deserve spaces that are healthy, equitable, and safe. We've seen growing public recognition of that truth, first through the COVID crisis, then through the largest civil rights demonstration in decades. We would never have chosen these tragic circumstances to spur change, but our professions are uniquely situated and therefore uniquely obligated to find ways to generate positive change from this time of adversity. Working together, I'm confident we'll succeed in achieving meaningful, lasting change. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you, Jane. Appreciate it, and we appreciate all the great work that AIA has been doing. We're going to now switch over to Andrew and go through his presentation, and then we'll have Q&A after Andrew concludes his remarks. Andrew, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good evening, good morning. So I want to talk to you today about the Architecture Declares movement, or declarations that we've made as an architectural group on declaring an emergency for our climate and biodiversity. So we know this, and I'm not going to show you lots of graphs about what's been happening in the last few years, the escalation of that. This is a photograph from Australia last New Year, and we know what happened there. We know what's happening in California and elsewhere now. So these are terrible problems, terrible issues that we need to tackle as architects, tackle within the construction industry. So we know that construction generates around 40% of global carbon dioxide. So both operationally and through the building materials, construction process, the manufacture of those materials, transportation, etc. So we are well aware that these the acts of an architect are impacting heavily on the global carbon issues. So we know that what we do as architects, how we design, how we propose methods for construction, we know that those have a massive effect on our planet. And we see this as an opportunity for architects. We see this as an opportunity for architecture and our industry to play an even more important role in society in terms of reducing our emissions. So you can see just from a building's implementation to its end of life, the operational carbon is the one that's usually accounted for, but actually the upfront carbon, the embodied carbon, is what we really need to be looking at for the next 10 years, which is in all likelihood the most important decade that's ever faced our species. So we as a profession in the UK have been watching and understanding and looking at what's been happening in the world, inspired by others. We have began to think about how we might change our profession. So what we've called this strategy for change. Now, changes start by highlighting the shortcomings of existing mindset. So what are we doing wrong right now? And then thinking about a cross-disciplinary support for how we can evolve, how we can begin to do better. And then that this will come over, and this is happening now, I believe that there is a tipping point beyond which this kind of this evolving mindset will begin to take precedent. So it's about a critical mass of support. And a few of us began to get together and have these conversations and realize that actually what we needed to do was to talk to as many people as we can within our profession and within our industry. So, and then begin to talk about, to discuss between each other, to articulate solutions and to share the skills that we know how to deliver this change. And then to work as an industry together to begin to put public pressure on government, on our clients, on society to make those changes. So that then that evolved mindset becomes mainstream and it diminishes the social license for outdated mindsets. Now, this is a process that's in process at the moment. Now, we, over a year ago now, nearly 18 months ago, we got together as a group and put together a number of declarations And with an initial group of people, we launched ourselves as Architects Declare on the 30th of May last year. And those declarations written in full here on the website, but I've pasted them for ease here. So it's about raising awareness, advocating for faster change, making sure that people understand that climate mitigation should be the key measure of success for architects. Not how big your practice is and not how bling your building is, but how you've really involved yourself, involved your client and your design team in changing the way that you think about design and think about the buildings, and sharing that knowledge and loudly evaluating all the new projects against climate change. Retaining existing buildings whenever possible. So perhaps an anathema to our industry, but actually thinking, do we knock it down, or actually should we just keep it? And evaluating carbon as a basic scope of work. So along with costings, along with engineering, we need to be evaluating carbon. We need to adopt a regenerative design approach. So thinking not only how can we reduce our impact, but actually how can our buildings, how can our actions improve the planet? And we need to collaborate to vastly reduce construction waste. In London and the UK, construction waste is more than half of our landfill. And we need to shift quickly to low embodied carbon materials. We need to reduce our reliance on concrete and steel. And we need to minimize the wasteful use of resources in architecture. We need to rethink about a design philosophy, a design community that actually thinks about the use of materials and the use of resources in its design. So this is us as a steering group. We're 12 people from across industry, both business leaders and students involved in the steering group. And it's global. We're more than 5,000 signatories now on 23 countries and becoming increasingly multidisciplinary. So it started, as I said, from the 17 practices, Sterling Prize winning practices in May 2009. And we inspired other disciplines. So we talked to structural engineers, civil engineers, building services engineers, landscape architects, project managers, and others. And then in July 19, by July 19, Norway, Australia, Italy had set up their own declaration movements. And then by September 19, the time of the climate climate emergency marches and protests in London at the end of last summer, we had further Iceland, New Zealand, South Africa. I'm not going to keep reading, otherwise it'd be big lists. And we marched. Architects Declare marched in the UK, we marched in Australia, we marched elsewhere. And by November 19, we had more members, January, even more, September, now 23 countries and counting, and we're still talking to more. So in a year on, the UK now has 985 signatories, looking to try and get that to 1,000 before Christmas. And how are we making a difference? How do we think as an organization that we're beginning to make a difference? Well, we are shifting mindsets. We had a meeting last November where 400 of us sat together in a room and had a conference. We started to talk about what we could do, how we could begin to facilitate that change we're talking about. And we give lectures, we share knowledge. And we're a global movement, as I was saying before, and we meet globally, which is incredibly exciting. So we have these Zoom meetings with members from across the world. And we increasingly collaborate. So collaborating with culture declares, business declares, tourism declares, really looking at kind of coalescing all different industries towards a declaration movement. And we campaign in the press, we write to the Prime Minister frequently, lobby the Prime Minister, we work with the RIBA to issue a rallying call to change our building regulations, to change the way that we compete with each other in architecture, and we advocate for climate justice. So the climate emergency, as we know, disproportionately affects those already facing social justice. So then anti-racism is essential part of a climate justice, inherent to climate justice. And we work to ensure that this is an integral part of our initiatives. And we ask ourselves questions. So 1 year on, we put out a questionnaire to all of our co-signatories. And we ask them, lots of questions, but we primarily asked them, what were you doing before you became a member? How do you think that your practice was talking about and thinking about these declaration issues? And then how much do you think you've changed? And we saw, and we were excited by the amount of change that we really have begun to engender within the profession. And we talk about those obstacles to change, whether they are clients, whether they are knowledge, whether there's regulatory factors, all these different things. And now we are beginning as a movement to really focus our attention on what these obstacles might be so that we can overcome them together as a profession. And we've learned from our signatories and continue to learn from our signatories. So what now? What's our next steps as an organization? So we're growing our organization structure. We're growing that to have an umbrella organization called Construction Declares, and there will be architects, engineers, landscape, project management, etc. Those will be regionalized so they can really become kind of very immediate kind of processes of conversation and of shared knowledge. And we're working outside of our silos, so talking to other businesses and other industries. We this summer had a panel discussion on enacting a green recovery, how we can begin to encourage our government to put forward meaningful climate change legislation. And we share our resources. So we are dedicated to open source for our signatories, and we look to discuss those with people outside of architecture as well. So we have Conference Declares videos by Kate Rayworth, Jeremy Lent, and others. And our next major milestone is COP26. So COP26 next November will be in the UK, in Glasgow, and we will take the opportunity to make that a major event that will really confront some issues around our industry. So our vision is a transformed built environment, planned, constructed, and operated within planetary boundaries and delivering positive social impacts for all. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Andrew. And Jane, let me ask you to come back on screen so the three of us can all be on screen here together. Appreciated both of your presentations. We've gotten quite a number of questions come in. I'm going to start with a couple that might sound all too familiar to you in your organizational activities. So, as you know, we certainly deal with a lot of architects that really understand climate change as a real driver and are committed in their practices and so on. But we also have a lot of our time spent really recognizing that our profession has not really moved along that chart that you showed, Andrew. How do you work with, really think about working with people sort of across the spectrum of interest? How do you introduce people to climate change for the first time? How do you really work with the climate change leaders on the other end of the spectrum? I'd like to hear both of you address that.
I can go first if you want.
With pleasure.
One thing that's really encouraging, Carl, we just did a pulse survey of our membership, and 80% of our members said that we should prioritize sustainability, which I think if we had done that a few years ago, it wouldn't have been nearly that high. So I think this COVID year has really changed people's perception on that. I think we're really seeing a movement on that. We have in our new strategic plan prioritized climate action as along with racial inequity as the two priorities that we should focus on. So everything that we're doing is focused on that. And I think one of the things that will help move members along is we have adopted, formerly it was the COPE Top 10. We have changed that, adopted it institute-wide as the framework for design excellence. And you will now have to address that when you're entering competitions. And that's even trickling down to local components competitions. So that's getting that framework in front of all of our members' eyes that they may not be looking at it just normally, but if they're entering competitions, they're starting to see it there. We also have a lot of education that we're doing for our members. We have a campaign program that is focusing on climate action. So we're really getting it out there in front of our members and educating the public too, because when the public starts asking for it, or when our clients start asking for it, then that will bring along some of those, that 20% of the architects that don't think it's all that important.
Absolutely. Firstly, Carl, I'd like to thank Jane and the AIA for the kind of leadership and encouragement that they are kind of demonstrating internationally. And I think from our own perspective, from a UK specific perspective, it really is about, as Jane's saying, encouraging the profession, both through the RIBA, through professional organizations, but also on a kind of, at a educational level as well. So the teaching that we do, the educational institutes, really, I think I'd say, not even kind of promoting or encouraging, but just allowing those voice of those students, and those younger architects to come through and to shine within our profession, and to allow kind of the priority that they give as a generation to this issue to really be heard. And I think that, I'm incredibly optimistic. The voice of clients, the voice of government in the UK is changing in a positive way day by day. And so I see this really now, less and less as something that we have to persuade people about, and more about a movement that needs to educate and to share. So I think one of the things that we need to overcome in architecture is that kind of constant competition between architects to always come up with the kind of, the sort of the number one single, the kind of very best idea. We need to be sharing these ideas. We need to be open source with each other, because that's how we're going to change our industry.
So there's been a couple of questions that really have talked about our partnerships and reaching beyond architecture, and reaching to both our sort of normal partners, and then beyond even those normal relationships. Number one, do you see that actually is a key to effective climate action? And are your organizations involved with that, and how?
I guess Jane, I'll let you kick off. Yeah,
okay. One group that we've been working with a lot in the past 3 or 4 years is the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and another group, the Mayors Innovation Project. And we see working with mayors is a real way to get into the cities where things are happening. As we know, the U.S. pulled out of the Paris Accord, but a lot of cities are still focusing on it. So that's where we can really dig in and make a difference. So we work really closely with the U.S. Conference of Mayors in sustainable issues. And they have another group that part of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which is the Climate Action Mayors. So we work closely with them. We also work with a lot of other groups. We meet with our counterparts in engineers and landscape architects and the different associations, and see how we can partner and work together with that. We also lobby hard on Capitol Hill. We have, for the first time ever, we think, we have put out a policy platform for the election this year, and climate action is right up there on top. So it's really trying to get from all levels, making some significant changes.
Andrew, a quick minute on you've talked about some of this in your presentation, but.
No, that's fantastic. And I think that, what Jane says is absolutely crucial. We're also working with mayoral organizations across the world, C40. We work with a lot, and also lobbying and encouraging governments, and also, but sharing those kind of ideas. I mean, I'd certainly like to pick up and understand from Jane later after this, some of those ideas that you're working through with on Capitol Hill. But I think that really it's vital that we don't stay in an architect silo, and that we reach out to the rest of our industry as well, and that this is an industry-wide movement.
Well, that's a terrific way for us to conclude this really great session. Thank you both so much. And thank you so much to both of your organizations. This is all about people. And we need to, you know, motivate and empower those people that are going to make the difference. And your organizations are really doing that. So Jane Frederick and Andrew Waugh, thank you very much for joining us today. So this concludes our session